Okay, it's my privilege to be invited. I'm very glad to see my old friend Tony, and also I'm very glad to see my colleague Jason. We worked together for 1 year in China in 2006 for the OSAID and NDRC, National Development Reform Commission. And as Tony probably mentioned, that economics seems decline disciplines, and economists have very bad reputation in forecasting the future. And so today I decided to only give you some qualitative forecasting rather than quantitative forecasting. Okay, so the topic I'm going to talk about is about prospect for reforms and new leadership, Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang. And so I prepared some slides. I will run through the slides one by one. And if we say Chinese economic reforms start in 1978, so if you count the number of years from 1978 to now, it's about 35 years. So if you look at the economic development record in the last 35 years, it was outstanding. But unfortunately, if you look at inside of China, you can see lots of we call imbalance. And therefore, at the moment, there's huge debate in the world whether China can continue its remarkable economic growth or not. And I can see there are two different views. One is we call optimistic views, represented by the former senior vice president of the World Bank and also the chief economist, Shi He-ling. And he argued that in the next 20 years, China can continue to grow at a rate about 20% or about 8% per year. It's very, very optimistic. But on the other hand, there's another views which I called pessimistic views, represented by legendary short seller Jinpings. And he argued that Chinese economy could collapse anytime, okay, could collapse in the next minute, basically. But reality normally is just in between. But nevertheless, there's a consensus which is emerging in the economic area, in the sense that Chinese economy is slowing down. So if you look at all the statistic figures for the first quarter of this year, 2013, you can see a very clear trend, that is Chinese economy is slowing down. Now it's slowing down. There are lots of studies trying to explain why Chinese economy is slowing down. Here I just list a couple of factors which has been extensively studied by economists. I just go through very quickly, and there's some technical terms in it. If you're not quite comfortable with all these technical terms, just to forget about it. Okay. So lots of studies argue that Chinese economy slowdown is due to called the diminishing marginal returns. So if you add more and more capitals into production, the marginal return, the return coming from the last unit of capitals, will decrease. Right? The aging population problem, the rising labor costs. There's lack of domestic consumption, there's excess capacity. I will come back to this point later on. There's environment degradations, and if you happen to have some experience living in China, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, and at the economic policy level, okay, that's a little bit technical term. That's called fiscal and monetary multiplier now gradually become less than 1. So what less than 1 means that initially when the Chinese economy is going down, the government spend $1, the GDP will increase more than $1. Okay, but if less than 1 basically means that now government invests $1 additional dollar into the economy and GDP increased less than $1. So that's one. That's called a multiplier. And there's excessive credit expansion, the real estate bubbles. If you got a chance to buy a properties in Beijing, probably you know what I'm talking about. I bought properties in the late 2006. Okay, in the last, let's say, about 7 years' time or 8 years' time, the property price has increased by 7 times. Okay, so as local government debt problems, I will come back to this later. And also there's government monopoly. The majority of industry has been monopolized by what I call the vested interest group. Okay? There's over-regulation on the entry to certain industry like telecommunication industry. There's income disparity problem. And I will come back to this later. And there's absolute and relative poverty issues. So if you look at all these issues, that has been studied by economists trying to argue that due to all these factors, okay, and China's economy will inevitably slow down. Okay? But that's at an aggregate level. Now let's look at some microeconomic level. Look at the real world. Okay? And things actually are worse than what this aggregate figure suggests. So in the next 3 slides, I will show you 6 cases which give you a profile of the microeconomic situations in China now. China has 7% of the land, which feed 20% of total populations in the world. But China uses 35% of fertilizer and 20% of pesticides. In 2009, according to World Bank statistics, chemical fertilizer used per hectares of land in China was 504 kilograms, which is 4 times of the world average. That's what happened in the agriculture sector. So yes, if you look at aggregated figure, it looks quite good, because if you look at all this yield of crops, okay, it's quite remarkable, outstanding. But behind all this achievement, you can see lots of problems, structural problems. Right, now let's move to the steel industry. That's an industry I've been following for a long time. In last year, 2012, China produced 710 million tons of steel, which is exactly half of the world output. However, realized profit of the whole industry, if you aggregate each steel mill's profit together, the realized profit was less than 1/7 of a company. This company is called Malte Liquor. Anyone know Malte? Yeah, Malte is the most well-known sort of spirits in China, which is normally used to serve the banquets of this government officials. Okay, so it's aggregated. It's less than 1/7 of one company. Now, if you look at the profit per tons of steel sold to the market, the profit is 1.68 yuan. If you convert to Australian dollar, it's about 28 cents for 1 ton of steel, which is not enough to buy a subway ticket in Beijing. Okay, that's the situation. All right, okay. So 22 out of 24 industries can have access capacity, and more than 90% of the regional airports are making loss. Because if we Australia go China, we normally land in Guangzhou, Shanghai, or Beijing, no problem at all. But if we got a chance to go a little bit further, say 100 kilometers away from Beijing, okay, you can see lots of troubles. So if you look at the regional airport, 90% of regional airport are making loss. I hope you agree with me that Chinese economy have some problem here, okay? Now, in 2012, China's energy consumption per dollars of GDP, so produce $1 of GDP, the energy consumption is 2.5 times higher than the world average. China's wood consumption per dollar of GDP is about 3 times higher than the world average. Back to my favorite industries, steel industry, okay? To produce $1 of GDP, the use of steel in China is about 10 times of usage in the United States, okay? Right, okay, so 5th, local government debt. Now, this is very sensitive issues, and if you read newspapers, you can find lots of different figures, ranging from $10 trillion to $20 trillion. So this 20 trillion yuan was estimated by the former Minister of Finance, or Finance Minister Xiang Huaicheng, okay, who estimated, used his own figures, and came out with this 20 trillion yuan of local government debt, which represents 38% of total GDP in the last year. Worse still, 20% of this debt now is called non-performing debts, means that local government borrow this money, invest it in some project which will not give you any returns. Okay. Now back to this income disparity issues. Okay, I'll show you some figures. Okay, the common sort of parameters which measure income disparity is called Gini coefficient. Okay? Gini coefficient basically measure the income disparity. Okay? From 0.3 to 0.35 is regarded as normal income distribution. 0.35 to 0.4 is regarded as unequal income distribution. If it's more than 0.4, that's regarded as a strong unequal distribution. Now, China's National Bureau of Statistics estimated last year that this Gini coefficient was 0.475, which belonged to very unequal income distribution. But that's not the end of the story, because my colleague, my student actually, my PhD student, who work in the Southwestern University of Economic Finance, used a sample survey, came out with a figure which is much higher than this. The figure is 0.61. That's the second highest figures in the world, only next to Brazil. Okay, so that's just to give you an indication of what's happening behind all these aggregate figures, just to give you illustrations of the picture. So here it's so so that's call for the economic reform, as Premier Li Keqiang warned that if there's no transformation, China's economic growth is unsustainable. That's the statement he made about 2 weeks ago. Right, but that's only in the economic area. Let's move slightly beyond the economic area. I know I'm talking to some expert in the international field. Okay, so I need to go a little bit beyond the economics area. All right, okay, so here I quote some outcomes, some results, some research from some international institute. Transparency International, they published an index which is called Corruption Perception Index. Last year, China got a score of 39, which is less than half of Australia's score, 85. Now, if you look at the ranking, out of 176, China was ranked as 80th, so slightly below the average. Okay, so that means that from Transparency International's perspective, China actually have serious problems corruption. Okay. Now, as a comparison, if you look at this, the same corruption perception index 10 years ago, 2002, the ranking actually was 49 or 59th. So it means in the last 10 years' time, China actually went in the wrong direction. And everyone heard about the BRICS, right? Now, this BRICS represent 5 countries. Okay. Now, have you heard about another sort of a synonym called SIC? SIC. No, I haven't heard of it. Okay, SIC represents 4 countries, which Syria, Iran, China, and North Korea. Why called SIC? Because this is only 4 countries in the world which have very tight controls of the internet. So if you happen to live in China, okay, if you have no access to this 5-star hotel, you will have no access to the YouTube. Okay? If you try to log onto the YouTube, it will send messages saying, according to the local regulation, you're not allowed to have access to the YouTube. All right? So if they put these 4 countries together, they come out with this SIC, SIC. Okay? And UNDP has very famous Human Development Index, and Australia always ranked very, very high in this Human Development Index. Last year, Australia was ranked as number 2. Okay, now what's the ranking of China? China last year was ranked as 101st, so it's well below. Okay, out of this 186 countries. All right, that next slide, I think you will laugh on it. Okay, it's very interesting. It's talk about the credibilities of the government. Okay, that's a serious issue. Okay, and this issue is so serious, and I will base on my predictions on the political reform on this issue. Okay, so what's the credibility issues in China? Okay, the People's Daily, probably know that's official newspaper. They have a website called the People's Web. Okay, okay. They run an online survey and ask this following 4 questions. Okay, now let's look at these 4 questions and try to get, before I talk about all these figures, I must say that this survey is a little bit biased, obviously, because in China, only the people below 45 have frequent access to the internet. And so most likely all this percentage of figures represent the view of some youngish people rather than the whole population, all right? Anyway, so that's just for fun, and let's look at these questions and answers. The first question they ask is, are you confident that the Chinese Communist Party has enough courage and wisdom to accelerate reforms? I give you 4 figures, okay? 7%, 5%, 13%, and 75%. You know, what's the answer? Okay. Strongly agree is the first figure, 7%. Agree is second figure, 5%. Disagree, 13%. What's the last one? Strong disagree. All right, okay, so I'm sure you will laugh on it. Okay. Anyway, the second question is that, do you agree that upholding and developing socialism with Chinese characters, okay, that's the so buzzwords in China, it's called socialism with Chinese characters. Right. Okay. Upholding and developing socialism with Chinese character is conducive to the fundamental interests of the overwhelming majority of people. 5% strong agree, 4% agree, 9% disagree, 82% strong disagree. Okay. Do you agree that only Chinese Communist Party is able to lead people to take a good road towards socialism with Chinese characteristics? 5% strong agree, 4% agree, 8% disagree, 83% strong disagree. Okay, it's interesting. Last question is related to the current sort of political regimes in China. That is, one party lead and other party participates. The Communist Party is the leading party. Okay, this condition cannot be challenged. But all other parties, whether you call it Democratic Party or Socialist Party or whatever, okay, only got the chance to participate, but does not have the chance to be the leader. All right, so the next question relates to the political regimes, okay? Are you in favor of the current political system of one party leads and other party participate? 6.5%, strong agree, 4.5%, agree, 8%, disagree, 81%. Disagree. Strongly disagree.
Did they publish this?
They publish it in one day, and then withdraw from the web. But my friend happened to see this result, and he have a screen capture, and he sent that to me.
How recent is it?
Just let me see. It's in February of this year. So it's about 3 months ago, 2 or 3 months ago. Okay, so I'm sure you're interested in it. All right, okay, so I'm sure you are now agree with me that in both economic area and political area, we need something we call reform. Otherwise, economics were going downward, and in terms of the political issues, I'm pretty sure that if we allow that sort of things continue to happen, okay, we will see some problems. Okay, so now we have 2 new leaders, and I'm sure everyone familiar with that. That's Xi Jinping and leakage. Xi Jinping is the party chief and also the chairman of the very powerful military commissions, and also the president of the nation. So 3 in 1. Okay? And the Li Keqiang is in charge of economic issues, and his official title is the Premier of the State Council. All right, thank you. Now, let's spend a little bit more time to talk a bit of these 2 new leaders' background. I think it's very, very important. Okay? And Xi Jinping, as we know, that is the son of Xi Zhongxun, and Xi Zhongxun is former vice premier and vice chairman of very powerful CCP, China Communist Party Central Advisory Commission. Okay, and that's during the Deng Xiaoping period. There's 8 elders, right, which monitor and supervise, okay, the running of the country. Okay, and therefore he's the son of a top party leader. He got PhDs in law from Tsinghua University also. At the moment, a lot of people laugh on the qualifications of the qualities of the PhD programs in that university. It used to be a provincial CCP secretary of Fujian, Zhejiang, and Shanghai. About five and a half years ago, he was elected a member of the Politburo Standing Committee and become a vice president. And last year, November, he was elected the general secretary of the party, and March of this year, he became the president of the nation. All right, so that's a bit of his background. Now, I'd like to talk a bit about his dissertation, because I think his dissertation is quite important. It might give us some ideas on what's in his mind on the future of Chinese economy. Okay, and he wrote the dissertation and got PhD in law in 2001, so it's 12 years ago. And his title is called Research on China's Rural Market. Okay, I listed the main point of his dissertation. I actually sometimes search the web and found his dissertation. Okay, so I read it and I summarized the main point he made in his PhD dissertation. He actually argued that in China they need to establish a rural markets, okay, and also the urbanization to improve the competitiveness of the agriculture sector. He obviously stressed the importance of the government leadership. He recommended removal of some institutional barriers, such as the household registration system. In Chinese, it's called HOKO system. Okay. Now, last point is very, very important. Okay, because he got PhD in law, and therefore, you should expect he should say something in the legal area. He proposed a legal protections of the legitimate rights and interests of farmers. Okay, that's what contained in his dissertation, PhD dissertation. Li Keqiang, okay, he used to be the general secretary of the Communist Youth League. Okay, that's the step to the Communist Party. He got bachelor's in law and PhDs in economics from very well-known university called Peking University. And his PhD supervisor is very well-known economist in China. I'm sure Jason knows that. And his name is the, what's his name now? Anyway, he helped to create the stock market in China. Interesting enough, his Professor Li sent his daughter to where? Monash University to do PhD and my supervision. So that's sort of interesting thing. And he used to be a provincial CCP secretary of Liaoning province and Henan province. About 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, he was elected a member of Politburo Standing Committee and become vice premier. And March of this year, he officially became the premier of the State Council. Again, I got a chance to have a quick look at his PhD dissertations, okay, published in 1994. And the title of dissertation is interesting. It's called On the Ternary Structures of Economy. If you're not familiar with not familiar with economics, you probably won't realize how interesting this topic is. Its title is because in economics there's a standard theory called dualism, so dual structure of the economy. But he tried to argue that in China, okay, you add one layer, okay, so that's called ternary structure of the economy. So what's these three tiers? He argued that in China you can divide the whole economy into rural sector, small town sectors, and city. Okay. Now, so he suggested that with the gradual breaking the rural-urban split of social institutions, along with the losing of the household registration system, is HOKO system. So it's quite interesting, actually. Both Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang, in their PhD dissertation, try to argue that we need to change the institution in such a case that allow the people to move freely across different sectors in the economy. So at least when they wrote this PhD dissertation, they have a bit of sort of liberal mind in their mind, okay? Yeah, so I will say that, okay? Now, let's move to the economic reform first. The reason is that after Li Keqiang became premier in March, this year, he has made very clear statements on the directions of economic reform. But political reform is a little bit complicated, so I leave this after the discussion of economic reform. All right, okay, so here's direct quote of Li Keqiang's assessment on the current economic situation in China. Okay, so I read it through, and actually it's very important. Okay, he said that about, let me see, this statement was made about 2 weeks ago. Okay, say now the State Council has 1,700 items for administrative review and approval. This government has determined to reduce a third of these items to further stimulate the market and creativities of society, enhance the market vitality, which will bring in current and long-term benefits. This is China's priority in economic reform. So he has made a very clear statement on what's the priority of China economic reform. That's reduce the number of items which at the moment now need what we call administrative review and approval. So what's the background? The background is that if a private investor tries to invest in a project, okay, if this project is big enough, you need to get approval, okay, from the authority to let you to go ahead. Okay? And it's not just the one authority, it's a very long and tedious procedure. You need to get approval from first, and then move to second, and then third. And in total, there's about 1,700 items you need to get approval. So it means by the end of days, probably you will have a paperwork as thick as that with all these red stamps on it. Okay, so but Li Keqiang's the view is that we need to reduce that numbers by 1/3. Okay, two more quotes. I think it's very important. Private sector finds nowhere to invest. Okay, some companies need to go through 27 departments and more than 50 steps to invest in a new project. This is very high cost, affect the enthusiasms of venture capitalists. Okay, the last one. By accelerating administrative review and approval procedure to stimulate the vitalities of market is undoubtedly an effective and efficient medicine to cure the current complications of the Chinese economy. Okay, so he has made very, very clear statement. Even today, before I came here, I watched TV, he made another very clear statement, just to emphasize that's the top priority now. Reduce the number of procedures for administrative review and approval. Okay, so what's Li Keqiang's diagnosis and prescriptions to solve the current complications in the Chinese economy? Okay, his view is quite clear. All these problems I listed before, these 6 cases, are due to the government abuse of power and use his terminology. That's due to government interference of markets. Okay? Because if we allow the private sector to develop, you will not see 90% of airport making loss. That's for sure. The reason for 90% of low regional airport making loss, but still there, is because the regional government want this airport to show off. Okay, so that's his views on the current problem. And then he come out with prescription. He tried to reform administrative review and approve procedure. But there's 2 notable omissions from his policy statement or policy priority. One is the reform of SOEs, state-owned enterprises. And second is the implementation of 2008 Antimonopoly law. Okay? First talk about SOEs. The reason for, we know that in China, the obstacle for private sectors to invest into certain industry, to some industry, actually are 2 obstacles. The first is the approval system, because you need government to approve it and let you to invest. And second is dominance of SOEs. Because there's big state-owned enterprises there, and they got all sorts of advantages, and therefore this prevent a private investor from putting money into that industries. Okay? But for whatever reason, Li Keqiang either intentionally or unintentionally omit the reform of SOEs. I believe that he tried to say SOEs, but he decided not to. The reason is that the reform of SOEs touch the political system, because behind each SOEs, there's a vested interest group. So when just got power, just elect to the premier of the state council, you try to avoid, okay, to avoid saying all this sensitive issue, okay. But my view is quite obviously, if you only touch the administrative approved system without touch SOE, state-owned enterprises, this policy will, okay, have no effect at all. Next slide, I will show. I'll provide more comments about it. And secondly is that in Australia we know that okay, the way to prevent some firms become a monopoly is in Australia we have antitrust law. In Australia we call it Australia Competition and Consumer Act, right? But in China, they have. In 2008, they passed a law that's called Antimonopoly law. I was actually involved in early stage on development of this law, so I got a bit of inside stories of this law. But after they passed this law by People's Congress, so far, I think how many years? 5 years already. They have never used this law. Okay, so it's a very interesting phenomenon in the sense that although we have a legal system here, although almost everyone agree that SOE, state-owned enterprises, okay, is one of the major obstacles for the private investment, okay, to invest into certain industries. But Li Keqiang just pick up something which is not, okay, the key issues of the current economic complications. All right, that's my assessment. And going back to discuss this called administrative approve and review and approve system, the track records are not very promising in China, because if you look at history in the last 30 years, almost every government when just came to the power, they promised to reduce the number of procedures, a number of steps, okay, in the administrative review the system. But it turned out to be, it's very interesting in the sense that this approval rights, okay, were normally redistributed from the central government to the local government. So central government decided to abolish, okay, this procedure, but local government pick it up. So if you want to invest money into a province, although you don't need approval from central government, but you need approval from the provincial government. This creates a good opportunities for corruptions at the local government level. Okay, that's track record, okay, which is not very promising. Now, second point related to SOE, even we allow the private sector invest into certain industries, but as I say, that some key profitable industries are dominated by SOEs. And the SOEs will always ask for some favorable conditions from central government, which give them some competitive edges. A typical example is that, okay, China petroleum last year made lots of profit, but still they ask for the subsidy from the central government, and central government actually give them 100 billion yuan of subsidy for no reason. Okay, so that's the current situations in China. So when the new industry emerge, when new industry comes, the government will normally, okay, introduce a new set of procedure for the administrative review and approval systems. And then if you look at over time, okay, so Li Keqiang's, although it is quite clear that the complication in Chinese economy is due to the interference government, okay, but the way he tried to reform whole system will turn out to be, from my view, okay, will become quite ineffective. Okay, now let's move to the political side, all right? And let's look at the Xi Jinping's assessment of the political systems in China. Okay, Xi Jinping's favorite slogan is that lip services goes astray, hard works lead prosperous. And that's why he has said very little about political reform. Okay, all right, okay. One notable exception is the following statement he made. And probably from this statement, we can see what's in Xi Jinping's mind. He made a statement, I think, before he visited Russia. Okay, he said Mikhail Gorbachev recklessly announced the dissolutions of the Soviet Communist Party. Such a large party just gone. Soviet Communist Party has a high proportion of population than China Communist Party, but not even one party member is a real man. Okay, what this means? This means there's not even a party member come to defense, okay, the Soviet Communist Party. All right, so I don't think I need to say any more. And we know what's the meaning of that. All right, now let's look at, because Xi Jinping don't like to talk, but like to take action. So let's look at what sorts of actions Xi Jinping has done in the last, let me see, it's 5 or 6 months' time. The first, okay, is to fight against corruption, right? And if you read newspaper, you can see lots of news about the anti-corruption sorts of issues. Okay. However, the method used to fight against corruption is very traditional. Okay, follow Chinese tradition. That is to detect, okay, and then to punish, rather than rely on the checks and balance of power. That's a modern political systems. The essential features of modern political systems. Okay, and not rely on independent judiciary. So they have a body of people. They try to detect all these criminal actors or corruptions and find it and start to punish the corrupt official. Okay. Interesting enough, okay, in fact, the majority of corruption cases are reported by the mistresses of these corrupt officials. 70% about that. Okay. So the Chinese people now try to say, all right, now call all these mistresses as anti-corruption heroes. Okay, that's first action. Now, second action is to impose strict disciplines against abuse public money for eating and drinking, for eat and drink. Okay. So as a result, okay, in the first quarter of this year, so January to March of this year, about 1/3 of top restaurants in Beijing suffer loss because no one now could go there to order some very expensive dishes, and therefore they're making a loss. And to give you an interesting example, I mentioned a Malte before, right? That's very expensive liquors in China. Okay, at the beginning of last year, 2012, one bottle of Malte, the retail price is about 1,000 or 2,200 yuan. Okay? But in May, this month of this year, okay, the price has dropped to 800 yuan per bottle. Okay, so you can see that. So some economists in China argue that actually, okay, contributed to the slump in domestic consumption in the first quarter of 2013. So if you look at domestic consumption, first quarter of 2013, it actually only increased about 5%, okay, well below the normal 8% growth rate of domestic consumption. Okay, some people try to argue that's because of that. Now, the third, I'm sure that if you read Economist, about 3 weeks ago, there was one very interesting article published in the Economist talk about so-called Chinese drink. Okay, so that's the third action of Xi Jinping. So the third action Xi Jinping has already taken is flag, okay, with very loud tone, with very lofty tone, the so-called Chinese drink. Okay, and there's millions of interpretation of this Chinese drink. What mean of Chinese drink? Okay, and the official interpretation is basically under leadership of CCP, people's living standard continue to improve, China's international status continue to strengthen, and eventually China become a great power in the world. That's the government or official interpretation of what we call, what Xi Jinping called Chinese drink. Okay. Now, can we see any hope of democracy? Okay, it's interesting enough. The answer is no. Okay, and China Communist Party have department, and the direct translation is called the Central propaganda department. But the propaganda sounds very weird and very, very bad. And so they changed the official translation of this department to the Central Communication Department. Okay, so it's more sort of neutral. Okay, but because propaganda is the words we don't like to hear. All right. Okay. They actually asked the university and colleges in China, okay, not to talk about foreign 7 issues. This news, okay, is widely circulated, but government official has neither confirmed it nor denied it. Okay, so that's the kind of situation. But since I work in university sectors, I have connections with all these universities in China, including Beijing and Tsinghua universities. And professors, all these professors working in these 2 universities have received this sort of requirement without any written sort of note, all right? Just oral requirement. Okay, so foreign 7 issue are not supposed to be mentioned, to be discussed, okay, in university and colleges in China. One is called universal values, second is called freedom of press, and third is civil society and civil rights, Chinese Communist Party's historical mistakes, okay, crony capitalism, and independent judicial systems. So these 7 sensitive words are not supposed to be discussed, okay, in the university system. Jason, if you still remember that when we work in China for the China-Australia government's program, we started programs in 2005. In our internal newsletter, we're allowed to mention civil societies, civil rights, and human rights issues. Okay, but towards the end of 2006, I don't know whether you still remember that, we received a command or receive a notice from NDRC, okay, not to mention these keywords, okay, in our even internal newsletter. Okay, that's exactly the same situation happening here. All right, okay. Now, here's a bit of defense of Xi's approach, and that sort of argument is now widely circulated in China. And the top leaders now always mention a book by, I don't know how to pronounce it, Tocqueville. Yeah, okay. All right. And this English title of this book basically is called Ancient Regions and the Revolution. Okay? And this book taught a very interesting things that its main argument is that an old system, okay, is in its most dangerous when it begins to reform. If there's an old system there, okay, if you just not reform it, just let it go. It's okay, although it's not ideal situation. But if you start to reform it, and these systems will become very, very dangerous, right? And they always use this the parables, okay, in China. Say a football match, okay. Initially, the referee is the armed police, so with all these guns there, and all this the football players must follow because it's threatened by the gun. But now reform basically means now we replace this armed referee with a civilized referee with no gun, and provided that people does not have lots of enough trust on this new referee, okay, the football match will turn out to be a chaos. Okay, so that's sort of argument currently in China, try to defend Xi Jinping's position of not to initiate a political reform agenda. All right, okay, I'm run out of time, so I've got to be a bit quick. Okay, so what's Xi's priority? If you read Xi Jinping's statement after he was elected to party chief and president of nations and also chairman of the military commission, it's quite clear that his top priority is try to establish its authority. In China, the most effective formula, okay, to establish authority of new leader have 2 elements, 2 components. First is fight against corruption, okay, in the domestic issues, and second is that flag and nationalism. You use Chinese, you use this top leaders terminology. That means to improve the international status of nation. Okay, so but if you look at the nature of this statement, basically it's about national rhythm. Okay, so to some extent, this sort of priorities in its policy, okay, can be used to explain the foreign sort of phenomena we observed in the last couple of months. Chinese leaders now frequently visit all these neighboring countries. Okay, they adopt a quite tough attitude against Japan, 3 countries, Japan, the Philippines, and Vietnam, began to intervene in the affairs between India and Pakistan and Israel and Palestine, established and tried to dominate the BRICS Development Bank that happened the last months. They're going to establish a BRICS bank to compete with the World Bank. Okay, and join as an official observer of the Arctic Council, participate in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Australia is one Australian member of this partnership of negotiation. So all this, okay, it is the outcome of his policy priority, trying to establish its own authority. Okay, but the question I always ask myself is that, let's say Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang or some new leaders succeed in establishing their personal authority. Okay, the question is, will they promote economic political reform agenda? Okay, frankly, I don't know. I don't want to make any sort of forecasting on that. But in my view, if they have such a vision and successfully implemented, they will become the great leaders in Chinese history, very much like George Washington's in the United States. Okay? But it is not impossible that after they establish their authority, they will continue their authoritarian regimes. Okay, a typical example is Chairman Mao Zedong. Before 1949, if you read Chairman Mao's statement, okay, he was the front runner to argue for democracies, two-party systems. If you read all the statements made by him before 1949, but after 1949, after he got power, after he established authority, okay, what's the situation? Everyone knows that. Okay? So, right, okay, let's quickly go through the implications for Australia, because we know we got lots of experts here, and therefore I make this part very short, and you might be in a much better position compared to me to answer that. What's the implications for Australia? Now, in the area of regional politics, China will encounter a more active and aggressive China. We have already started to see that happening. Okay, so it will make Australia more difficult to handle the mutual relationship with the United States, with Asian countries, with China. Okay, China will become very aggressive in the coming years in this region because of the priorities of Xi Jinping's policy. Now, in the economic area, the progress of urbanization, I mentioned that both Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang in their PhD dissertation mentioned urbanization is inevitable procedure, okay, for economic development in China. So urbanization is almost a certain way to go. Last year, the urbanization rate in China is 51%. It is expected that in 7 years' time, that's 2020, the urbanization ratios will increase to 70%. Okay, so that means it can maintain the demand for Australia's mineral and energy products. So that's good news. Okay, and Li Keqiang always asked that we need to let market play more important role, and therefore we can interpret that as his intention to open up the market. But open up market obviously will bring some new business opportunities for Australia. But in my view, although there's new business opportunity, but it's not a lot of business opportunities. Okay, in the service sectors, because Australia has been hoping to break into the service sectors in China for a long time. Okay, for example, banking, finance, insurance, and other sectors. China will maintain or even enhance the dominance of SOEs, and therefore the door is slightly open but will not be wide open for Australian investors. Okay, I finished here. Okay, thank you very much.